We are in open session, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome back, Madam, for your testimony. Now, before we continue, there's a little legal matter I want to discuss with you. You may have heard in the morning some discussion between myself and the defense lawyer on this matter, but I need to clarify with you that the rules of court that guide us say before a witness is to testify, that witness shall be informed that under the provisions of the court's statute, there is offense provided for against false testimony. We're required to inform you this, not because we suspect that you are here to lie or that you are already. No, it's because the rules provide that that information needs to be given to the witness. Ordinarily, how we prefer to deal with this is that the witnesses are told that, given that information before they come into the courtroom. And I understand that that has been done with you. I've been told that that has been done with you. I also wish to confirm it with you. You don't need to say anything. It's simply a matter of me informing you this thing that's in the rules. Again, please bear in mind that the idea is not that we are suspecting you of having not told the truth, or we are suspecting you of coming here to not tell the truth. It's just some information we are required to give you. Okay? Thank you. Prosecutor may proceed now.
Thank you, Your Honours. Madam Witness, just before we took the short break, you were telling us about the violence which erupted in your area after the announcement of the election results. Is that correct?
Witness, yes, that's correct.
Can you please tell the Chamber how this came to your attention, the violence?
Nianzie tarehe moja ama nianzie wapi? Nifafanulie.
Question, would you like me to start with the first? Or where should I start? Perhaps you could explain that to me.
Certainly. I'm now talking about the violence that you spoke about, where your parents' home was burnt and houses were burnt in the Kamuri area. So this is prior to the first.
Mr. President. Crimes is still pending before the Mr. President and Your Honours, we are aware that the prosecution had made an application to extend the temporal scope of the crimes in these issues to include the period of 30th and 31st December 2007. That issue was disallowed by the pretrial chamber and is pending before the appellate court. The question posed by the prosecutor to include the alleged crimes in Kimuri would extend to the period that is still pending for determination. And we would pray and insist that the time scope within which the evidence can be adduced be limited to the time period which was allowed in the pretrial decision.
But doesn't the effect of the pretrial chamber's ruling, isn't the effect that to the extent that the ruling of the pretrial chamber rejecting the application to amend the indictment, to the extent that that ruling stands and it's not reversed on appeal, isn't the effect that that extended temporal scope may not be taken into account in the evaluation of the case in the end to be done by the trial chamber, as opposed to a truncation of a narrative flow to a story?
Mr. President and Your Honors, it is our contention that the rejection by the pretrial chamber not only excludes the non-consideration by the chamber, but it also includes that evidence relating to that period should not be adduced, Your Honors.
The objection is overruled.
Right.
Council's microphone, please.
I know what you mean, Mr. Steinberg, but we will not be that drastic. We try to be liberal at the ICC.
As Your Honor pleases.
And that relates to an item of clothing. But
Madam Witness, please will you proceed to answer the question, and that is, how did it come to your attention, or how did you come to know of the violence which occurred immediately after the announcement of the election results, and that is prior to the 1st of January?
Nikirudi nyuma kidogo ndivyo hata niwache ile.
Let me backtrack a little bit to say that before I suspended work, there were some people who caused us to be fearful. And then later on, there were a number of meetings, and I also found out that the threats were founded. On the 30th, my parents' home was burnt down, and I thus became aware that the acts of violence were ongoing.
Trying to avoid identifying information, can you tell the Chamber who are the people doing the threatening, broadly speaking, and who are being threatened?
Ni vijana tuliokuwa tukifanya nao wa kabila la Wakalenjin.
Answer. It was some Kalenjin youth with whom we used to work.
And who were they threatening?
Walikuwa wakitisha mimi kuniambia kama hatuchagui.
Those youth threatened me. They told me that if we did not vote for the ODM, we will face the consequences.
When you say that they told you that if we do not vote for the ODM, we will face the consequences, who are you referring to when you use the word we?
ni sisi wa Kikuyu.
Answer. I am referring to we, the Kikuyu.
Thank you. I will return to the various meetings in due course in private session, but for the time being, can we turn to the events of the 1st of January, and can you start by telling the Chamber where you were on the morning of the 1st of January?
Asubuhi tarehe 1 siku ya Januari nilikuwa
Answer. On the 1st of January in the morning, I was in church.
Can you tell the Chamber, please, the name of the church and where it is situated?
kanisa linajulikana kama KAG, Kenya.
Answer. It is the KAG, Kenya Assemblies of God Church in Kiamba.
And why were you at the church that morning?
Mimi nilitoka kwangu saa 8 ya asubuhi. Nikaenda.
Answer. I left my house at 2 in the morning. I went to the church to pray, or rather to seek refuge for myself and my children.
Seek refuge from whom?
Nilikuwa nikijiokoa kwa sababu ya ile tension ilikuwa ya.
Answer. I was fleeing because of the tensions that had arisen following the burning down of houses on the 30th by young Kalenjin people in Kimuri.
Please could you describe to the Chamber, in your own words, who was at the church that morning and what the scene was like at the church and what people were doing before the violence started? And before you answer, if I can just remind you, when you wish to refer to any members of your family who might have been with you, if you could refer to them using the list which I provided to you earlier.
Tulikuwa watu wengi bahali pale, wa mama na watoto.
There were many of us at that location, children and women. The members of my family were with me. As for the children, number 3, 4, and 6 were present. The other members of my family who were there were number 4 on the list of adults.
And where had the people who were there spent the previous night?
Tulikuwa na wakongwe, kwa hivyo ndani ya kanisa tuliwachia wakongwe.
Answer. Some courageous people were there, and they are the ones who remained in the church with the children. Those of us, adults and some children, some of us, that is the adults and some children, spent the night outside the church building, outside.
And what did you sleep on?
Wakati kila mtu alikuwa anatoka kwake, tulikuwa tunabeba gondoro na...
Answer. People had left their homes with mattresses and covers, so we were able to sleep on the mattresses, and we had some blankets to cover.
In due course, I will show you a sketch that you made of the church compound earlier, but for present purposes, can you just tell the court where you were in relation to the church at the time the trouble started on that day?
Nifafanulie vizuri kati ya kanisa na kwangu, nasema ni...
Answer. Please, can you explain to me what you're saying clearly? Could you clarify your question? Are you talking about my home or about the church?
I'm talking about the church itself. Perhaps the question was a little bit vague. Let me try to rephrase it. Can you start off by telling the chamber where you were when you first noticed that there was trouble brewing on the morning in question?
Tarehe 31.
Answer. On the 30th, on the 31st rather, I went to a feast somewhere, then went back to my home, and it is thereafter that I went on to the church.
All right. Let me focus your attention then on the events of the 1st of January. Perhaps it's best if I just ask you to tell us in your own words what happened on the morning of the 1st of January, starting with where you were on that morning when you awoke.
Ni uchungu nikiongea, lakini nitajaribu.
Answer. It is difficult for me to narrate these events, but I will try. In the morning, we got up, and some people had already fled from Kimuri. Women had decided not to prepare food in their homes, but rather to prepare some tea where they were found because they deemed that it was safer there. Then on our way home to look for the items to be prepared for meals, before we could even do that, we heard people shouting from above. You see, from our home, it is possible to see to the distance because we are in the valley. There was a farm near the police station to the left, and we heard the shouting coming from that area. The enemies had come, they were singing, and then towards Kabongo, we saw some people came in later on. At that time, the adults advised us to go to the church, to enter into the church.
Thank you. Madam Witness, can I just ask that when you're giving your narrative, if you could just pause every now and again to allow the translators an opportunity to catch up. Now, could you please describe the people who you saw approaching?
Hao watu walikuwa ni watu wengi, karibu watu 1,000 walikaa chini.
There were a lot of them, many of them, about 1,000 of them. They were singing as they came closer.
I do not know if the interpreter got all that the witness say, but I did notice that she was speaking when the interpretation started. Madam, there are some people, interpreters, who are in the booth who are interpreting what you are saying. As you very well know, sort of suspect that the bench does, we do not understand Swahili. It's important that the interpreters translate or interpret what you are saying into English. And for that to work smoothly, you need to allow the interpreters some time to translate before you continue speaking. So speak in little chunks of information, pause, speak again, to allow them to interpret effectively so we can hear and record everything you're saying. Can you, prosecutor, are you satisfied with the last answer given, or do you need to repeat?
I will continue to explore this area. Thank you, Your Honor. You described approximately 1,000 youths. Can you tell the court from which direction these youths approached the church?
Walikuwa wanaelekea upande wa kanisa.
Those youths were coming towards the church.
The question was, from which direction were they coming? You say they were going towards the church. Which direction did they come from?
Mimi nitaonyesha na vitendo kwa sababu sijakuwa sana msomaji wa.
Answer. I will attempt to show you these things using my hands, by gestures. I didn't go to school well enough to be able to tell you the directions. They came from above, from up, as I have indicated with my hand.
And the witness was indicating towards her back with her hand. Prosecutor, you have to record the movement.
I was getting to that, Your Honor. Thank you. You indicate with your left hand pointing over your shoulder, approximately 45 degrees to the rear. Perhaps it would be easier if you just tell the court, is there a town or a location in that direction from which they were approaching, which you can use as a reference?
Kwa huo upande wenye nimeonyesha na mkono wangu.
Answer. Are you talking about the direction which I pointed to with my hand?
If that is the direction from which the youth were coming, yes.
Kuna boma zingine kwa sababu kuna barabara iko hapo ukiifuata ndivyo una.
On that side, there is a road leading towards a place called Chebaloso.
Okay, thank you. I think it may be easier then if we deal with this rather using the sketch map. I'll come back to that. Now, you mentioned that the youth you saw were singing. Can you tell the court what they were singing and if you are able to, what the purpose of the singing was?
Hao vijana wakati walikuloch na wakaimba hoi ho.
Answer. As those youth came closer, they sang, saying, "Hoi, hoi." And at that time, we saw other enemies coming from Kabongo.
Was this a different group of enemies?
Walikuwa tu adui hao kwa sababu wote walikutana pale kanisani na kutush.
Answer. They were of the same group because they all came to the church and attacked us there.
But if I understand correctly, you say they came from two different directions. Is that correct?
Hivyo kuna wenye walitokea nyuma yangu na wengine.
Answer, yes, that is correct. Some came from behind, while others came from the left side.
And can you estimate in total the number of attackers that came to the church?
Sikuwahesabu lakini nilichukua tu approximate.
Answer. I did not have time to do a head count or to count them, but I would put their number at approximately 3,000.
And could you please describe for the court, to the extent you can, what sort of clothing they were wearing, what they were carrying, and any other physical characteristics you noticed about these attackers?
Wengine walikuwa wamevaa vinyasa, wengine.
Some of them were wearing leaves, and others had pieces of cloth on their faces. Others were bearing traditional weapons such as machetes, axes, and sticks.
And what sort of clothing were they wearing?
Wengi walikuwa wamevaa vinyasa na zilikuwa nyingi ni za kaki na bantana.
Answer. Most of them were wearing clothing of a khaki color, while others tied pieces of cloth around their heads.
Were any of the attackers disguised in any way?
hivyo walikuwa wakipakwa hizo nyuso zao, ndio hata ukikaribia mtu.
Answer, yes. They had painted themselves in such a way that it was difficult to recognize their faces, even if one came close to them.
And can you tell us, firstly, what they had used to paint their faces, and secondly, well, let's just start with that.
Ilikuwa ni chokaa nyeupe kama vile wanavyo.
Answer. They painted themselves with whitewash, black, or rather white clay.
And were all the attackers painted this way, or only some of them?
Nimekuelezea vizuri wale walioonekana kama ndio viongozi wa kuonyeshana area.
Answer. I explained to you that their leaders had some cloth or fabric tied around their heads, but the youth who were attacking had painted themselves with white clay.
And finally, can you comment on the ethnicity of the attackers?
Kabila yao ni wa Kalenjin.
Answer. They were Kalenjin.
How do you know that?
Ungesikia hata Kiswahili chao ama kuongea kwao, wao upenda kwenda.
Answer. The Swahili they spoke made it possible for one to easily identify them. For example, if they wanted to attack someone, they would use the word Pilichu and Mete, and those gave it away, and I was able to understand that they were Kalenjin.
Apart from the language and the speaking, was there anything else that was able to give you an indication of ethnicity?
Ningeelewa kwa sababu sisi hakuna kitu chochote tulikuwa.
Answer. It was easy for me. Because they were bearing bladed weapons such as arrows and spears, but we had no weapons.
Can you then please tell the Chamber in your own words what happened when the attackers reached the church?
Kwa muda usio mrefu sisi wakati tuliingia pale kanisani, mimi ni.
Answer. When we arrived at the church, I personally went into the church through the main door. At that time, the church was full, and I was very close to the window. We then took some mattresses and were able to sleep on the mattresses. But later on, the church was torched.
Tell the chamber what you observed while you were inside the church.
Dirisha za hiyo kanisa zilikuwa ni za mbao. Kwa hivyo
Answer. The windows of the church were in wood. There were some cracks in the windows. I was able to look through, and I could see and identify Mr. Chamalan, who was holding a blue calabash.
Let's firstly clarify the issue of the windows. Did these windows have glass in them?
dirisha ni ya mbao.
Answer, no. They were wooden windows.
All right. So, do I understand that the frames were constructed of wood, but there was no glass in between?
Hivyo.
The witness, yes.
And was there any means by which these windows could be opened or closed, or should I say, the openings could be opened or closed?
Lakini wakati huo
Yes, it was possible to open or close the windows, but I was not able to open them because there were stones being thrown and arrows being directed at the windows from all sides.
All right. Let me just ask you to finish describing the church. Can you describe also what the walls and the roof were made of?
kanisa lilikuwa limejengwa na offcuts, hizo pieces za mbao, na kwa sababu
Answer. The church was made of planks of wood, and on the inside there was mud. So there was a mud lining to the inside of the church.
And the roof?
juu ya
There were some sheets across the roof, and the ceiling was made of wood, planks of wood.
Sheets of what formed the roof?
paa ilikuwa ni mabati, yani kanisa lilikuwa
The roof was made of corrugated iron sheets, and there were corrugated iron sheets covering the church.
Thank you. And what were the cracks, or where were the cracks through which you were able to observe what was going on outside?
Mimi nimekuelezea
Answer. I said that I was next to a window and there were holes in the windows, and it was through these holes that I could see what was happening.
And at this time, how many people approximately were inside the church?
hungeweza kuhesabu kwa sababu kanisa lilikuwa limefinyana na tulikuwa wamama na wa
It's difficult to estimate. The church was full. There were the women of Kiamba and there were children too.
Are you able to give us an approximate estimation, whether it was in the tens and the 50s, the hundreds, thousands?
Pahali pale Kiamba nafikiri ploti zenye ziko pahali pale ni karibu 100.
In Kiamba there's about 500 households, and I'm trying to make an estimate. We were probably around 2,000, 1,800, 2,000 approximately in the church at that time.
You mentioned that you saw a gentleman by the name of, or a person called Chemalan. Can you tell the chamber what are his full names?
Chamala ni mtu wa eneo la kwangu, yeye huishi Chevarus na alikuwa wakati huo akigombea kiti cha
Chemalan lives in Tbilisi. He's someone from my area, and at that time he was a candidate for the ODM during the elections. He was a local leader in the elections.
I will deal in more detail with your relationship and your knowledge of Mr. Chemalan, but for the time being, could you just tell the court his full names, please?
Yeye huitwa Stephen Kipletin Chemalan.
Answer. His name is Stephen Kipletin Chemalan.
And you mentioned that you observed he was holding something. Can you please describe that in more detail?
Ilikuwa ni jerikani ya blue.
He was holding a blue container.
Can I just confirm what is the word that you used for the container?
Unaweza tumia jerika ama kibuyu.
Answer. I said it was a gourd, literally, or a jerry can.
And how was Chemelan dressed?
Alikuwa amevaa kinyasa cha kaki na kichwa alikuwa
So he was wearing khaki clothing and a bandana on his head.
And was he disguised in any way?
Pahali pale alikuwa amesimama, kulikuwa na wale waliokuja wakiakisha ile moto. Kwa
where he was, there were people setting fire to the church. He was in the middle of these people, but one could see him clearly.
Perhaps I should put my question a bit more specifically. You mentioned that certain of the youth, or certain of the attackers, were disguised with white clay. What I'm interested in knowing is whether Chemelan was one of those people who was disguised with white clay or not.
alikuwa akificha kwa sababu sio desturi yake kujifunga kitambaa kwa kichwa.
Answer, I would say he was hiding his face to a certain extent because he was not in the habit of wearing anything at all on his head.
What was he wearing on his head?
Alikuwa amejifunga kitambaa, sisi hukiita bantana, kitambaa kidogo anafunga.
Answer, he was wearing a bit of cloth on his head that we normally call a bandana.
For the record, you indicated with your fingers in front of your forehead and back towards your ears. Was that intended to indicate where the bandana was on his head?